Good evening. Welcome to HFA's Young Adult Google Hangout series. My name is Lauren Nybert. I'm the Associate Director of Programs for HFA. This series was created about a year ago for our young adult community, so those ages 18 to 35 that are living with bleeding disorders. We've hosted a variety of topics so far in this series, from employment to dating issues to pain management. You can check out all of our past Hangouts on HFA's YouTube page. So tonight's Hangout is focused on traveling internationally with a bleeding disorder. And we have a group of panelists tonight on the line, Sean, Michelle, and Alex, who will be sharing some of their personal experiences with traveling internationally. You know, what to have, what to be prepared for, and some of their instances of how they advocated for themselves while on the road. So just keep in mind tonight that all of the tips and suggestions that the panelists have are not to be taken as direct advice. You know, they're their personal experiences, but please, we encourage you to reach out to your HTC or your healthcare provider to find the right plan that will work for you when traveling abroad as well. So, but we encourage you to just sit back and listen to our lovely panelists share their experiences, and we'll get the conversation started. So let's go ahead and first meet everybody. Who would like to go first?
I can go. So my name is Sean Jeffrey, and I am 24. I have severe hemophilia A. I've been involved in the community through various boards on HFA and HF. I've done NYLI and also Step Up, Reach Out. I do a lot of stuff with camps, hemophilia camps, and outdoor programs like that. So yeah, I'm excited to be on the call tonight.
Thanks, Sean.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm 22, a recent college graduate. I have borderline moderate von Willebrand's disease type 1. My involvement through the community has been through going to Camp Old Eagle in Michigan since 1998 when I was 6, being involved with NYLI through NHF for 4 years, and then also just being involved on a local community level through various events. And I've done 2 recent trips abroad internationally that pertain to this discussion, and so I'm excited to talk about some of the experiences I've had.
Right. My name is Alex L., and originally I'm from Portland, Oregon, but now I live in Vegas. I personally have severe hemophilia B, but I've been involved on many levels in hemophilia. At Oregon Summer Camp, I was the vice president over the Oregon chapter, Washington Days, NYLI, a lot of other community events. For work, I own a business called Capital Realm Insurance Group. I focus primarily on health insurance, and in college I studied abroad, with our home base being in Austria. On the weekends I traveled to Germany, Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovenia, and to end my trip, 2 of my great friends, Rich Bazzillo and Josh Lunier, who both have hemophilia, came out, and we went to Italy and Spain, and we had a great time traveling together, and I've also traveled to Thailand and a couple other countries off the top of my head. So I'm Alex.
Great. Thank you all for being here tonight. So to get us kicked off, what kind of research did you do before your trips, either about the country or what you wanted to kind of get in order before you left? What kind of preparation did you all do?
I think for myself, so the 2 places that I traveled to were New Zealand and Mexico. I traveled to Mexico when I was a lot younger, about high school or so, and New Zealand was in college. For the Mexico trip, I traveled with a missionary church group. as far as research goes for that, we were on the border directly, so I did research as to which treatment centers and hospitals were near the border in Texas, near where we were staying in Mexico. As far as New Zealand, I traveled with a group that everybody had hemophilia, and we worked directly with the New Zealand chapters. So as far as things like that, we are very well prepared. The Mexico trip, I had a nurse with me. The New Zealand trip, I had doctors, nurses, all kinds of stuff. I mainly just kind of looked in the area just to see what, prepped with the traveling group and where I was going to be, and if something did go wrong, where would be the closest place I would go for treatment and things like that. I also kind of looked at things like, insurance and how that would work with different countries and things like that. Luckily, I didn't have any issues and I never got injured, so I never had to go to any treatment centers, but it's always good to prepare and be safe.
See, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, yes, you're good.
Getting used to this mute and unmute. Before traveling, kind of prepping for the trip, I always like to do a search on airport security to see what kind of restrictions the country might have, and also to really check if it's an English-speaking country. Sometimes a lot of people speak English, sometimes speak a little bit of broken English. I only speak English, unfortunately, so I have to rely on people to speak English. And I've only had a couple of problems with non-English speaking countries, but it wasn't really too hard because I had a travel letter, which I had prepared beforehand. And what I also do is, one, I contact my treatment center. They help me write the travel letter. It has information like, my pertinent medical information, what type of hemophilia I have, has a licensed professional sign it. And then I also go to a website called 5rr.com, and I can hire someone that speaks the language of the country which I'm going to, and for like $5, they will translate the letter for me, so I have an extra copy in a different language that helps as well. I always confirm my bleed dose with my treatment center, and I found that to be very, very important when I traveled to Austria a few years ago because I had the worst bleed of my life. Or I should say the worst joint bleed of my elbow, I should say. And it's just, you don't want to run out of medicine in foreign countries. You want to make sure you bring enough medicine, and I couldn't put more emphasis on that, how important that is, because I did run out, and I'll explain later how I got more medicine to myself. Let's see, I also contact my insurance company, like Sean said, to ensure there's not really a delay in emergency treatment. Sometimes it really depends on the insurance company, but also when it comes to trying to get factor across seas or across borders, it can be very, very difficult. So I always ask those questions ahead of time. And I also look at the World Federation of Hemophilia website. They have a Find a Treatment Center button. While I personally did not contact them, I knew where they were just in case I needed them while I was in, say, Italy, for example. And again, I'll put emphasis on the travel letter. That was really, really helpful for me. And that's pretty much it for right now.
So the two most recent trips that I have gone on, the one that was the big one was I did a semester study abroad through my university called the European Odyssey, and basically every 3 weeks we were in a new city with a new professor who would meet us there, and we'd have a class and things like that. The second trip I went on was last year. I was fortunate enough to go to the World Federation of Hemophilia's World Congress in Melbourne, Australia. So those are my two trips. And for prepping for my study abroad, my biggest thing was communicating with my campus's Office of International Education. Because it was a program through them, I got my letter from my HTC, similar to Alex, and I made sure that the Office of International Education on my campus had a copy of that letter, as well as the one professor who was with us 80% of the trip. I wanted to make sure that those two places had it, as well as having a letter on myself at all times, so that if something were to happen, and one of those two people were contacted, they would be able to find the information. The letter just simply stated what von Willebrand's disease was, how I personally treated my von Willebrand's disease, so that way they could give me the correct medication, and then how to contact the HTC in Milwaukee if there were questions. The other thing that I had to do in really prepping and preparing for the trip was just advocating for myself, but I think we're going to touch on that a little bit later, so I'll save that for then. On my trip to Australia, I had to get my own travel insurance during my study abroad trip. That was all provided through my study abroad pay and things like that, so I didn't have to worry about doing that on my own. But on my trip to Australia, I really had to make sure that I had purchased the correct travel insurance for myself, so that way if something were to happen while I was in Australia or traveling to Australia, I would be able to get the treatment that I needed. So really those were the big things on prepping for me. But the other really important thing that I needed to remember to prep for as a woman with a bleeding disorder was trying to make sure that I had enough things to treat with. So I personally haven't used birth control in many years to treat my bleeding disorder, but if you use birth control to treat your bleeding disorder, making sure that you'll have enough to bring with you, similar as if you would have factor that you bring on the trip with you, as well as making sure that you bring enough feminine hygiene products to last your entire trip, because each culture has their own different kind of feminine hygiene I've discovered in my travels, so it's just important to bring enough with you for that as well.
Great, thank you guys.
Lauren,
So,
can I mention one more thing?
yeah, go ahead.
I forgot something. So, Michelle, thank you for sharing all that, and Sean too. One thing I forgot to mention was I bring 2 tourniquets just in case I lose one. It's it's not the easiest thing finding a good tourniquet, especially most of us have our favorite ones. It's hard to find our favorite one on the road. And I also divide my medicine supplies into 2 different bags. That way, in case your luggage gets lost, or if you go to some countries, it's pretty easy for things to be stolen, and that way you can keep track of everything and always make sure there's at least some medicine on you, just in case something happens. So, forgot to mention that. Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alex. And that actually was going to be my next question on other kind of important items that you all wanted to pack, or was important, especially in your carry-on versus a suitcase that you were checking. So any other kind of important baggage things or things at security that you had to consider that you hadn't already mentioned?
For me, the one thing looking back, and this, I know we kind of touch on it at the end, but looking back on my trips, the one thing I wish I would have packed would have been an ACE wrap. Those things I don't typically use those with my type of bleeding disorder, but there was an instance where the joint that I have had it bleeded was acting up and I fell on it, and I wish I would have brought something for that. So I think it's better to be over prepared for these types of travel situations. Bring stuff you may not think. If you're prone to bloody noses like I am, making sure that you're packing lotion and Vaseline for the airplane, as well as tissues, so that way you're not stuck in a situation where you're getting blood everywhere. So I find it better to be overpacked for these types of trips with supplies that you may not think you would need, because just when you think you won't need them, that's generally when you need them. So.
Great advice. Thanks, Michelle. So in terms of once you got on your trip, I know a few of you had maybe some instances of needing to advocate for yourself on your trip. First of all, were you, traveling with others? I think most of you were. If there were times that you were traveling alone, how did you prepare, I guess, to advocate for yourself on the road? Maybe what steps you put into place for that, and then maybe other experiences you had when maybe an emergency happened.
I think for myself, for advocating, I traveled with a lot of different people. For the New Zealand trip, everyone knew what hemophilia was. They were very, educated with it. Doctors, nurses, people, all that stuff. So I didn't really have to do much prep with those folks. For my trip to Mexico, nobody. I mean, there was one other person in the group who was a medical person who was a nurse, but I did. I'm pretty open about my disorder, so I let everybody in the group know that I had hemophilia, what to do if something happened, where my medical alert brace is, where my card is, travel letter, all those kinds of things. So I definitely talked to people and let them know that where everything was, just in case for some reason if I got a head injury or anything where I couldn't really advocate for myself, someone else could at least try to. And then also with the travel letter and things like that, I did have the contact information to my HTC. So if they couldn't advocate for me, they knew who to put in contact with the individual, so then they could advocate for me. So that's really what I did.
All right, I'll go ahead and go. I didn't really, in terms of emergencies, nothing really life-threatening. But while in Austria, I mentioned earlier, I had a really bad, probably the worst elbow bleed in my life, and it's not even my target joint, so it just kind of came out of nowhere. No matter how much factor I took, rest, ice, compression, elevation, didn't matter. I could not get my arm to straighten for about 3 months, and it was really hard studying abroad and traveling in a foreign country throughout all of that. It made carrying my backpack difficult, um, but being in close contact with my treatment center, they were giving me updates. I was seeking medical advice. I mean, they helped so much. And part of the reason why my elbow bleed got worse was because I couldn't get back to my medicine in time, and that was a mistake that I made early on, where I should have had, a dose on hand. If I was a couple hours away from where my medicine was, and that was a mistake. So from that point on, I've always carried around a backpack, no matter where I am, with a dose, even if I'm in the U.S. There's nothing like not being able to get back to your medicine. And at least traveling with people, I've always traveled with friends, and even people that didn't know anything about hemophilia were always very interested, and I would do an infusion in front of them, explain hemophilia, show them my travel letter, tell them who to call in case something happened, and I've always had positive experiences from all of that. Everyone's been really open to learning and helping me if anything was ever to happen. And throughout my traveling experiences, I've never felt too inhibited by my bleeding disorder. I'd say just more so if you have a bleed, it's very uncomfortable, and it takes a while to get better, especially if you're carrying heavy things. So to this day, I really don't carry a heavy backpack anymore because I have arthritis in my left ankle. So I've transferred to having a regular travel bag where it rolls, and that helps a great deal. So that would be some advice that I would give. And I think Michelle made a great point earlier about the ACE bandage. That helps as well. So go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, so as far as advocating, I think that the biggest thing that I've encountered is just speaking up for myself when issues occur. There are two instances from my study abroad that really stand out in my mind. The first one is when we went to Ostia Antica, which is right outside Rome. There are some ruins similar to Pompeii, but they weren't destroyed by a volcano. They were just destroyed by time. But we were climbing all over the ruins, and I fell on my ankle that I've previously had a bleed in. And I tried to ignore it for about a minute, and then I realized that it was going to turn very bad, potentially could turn very bad very quickly. And so I turned to my friends and said, hey, I'm sorry to interrupt the fun, but we have to start walking back. And it was about a 20 to 30 minute walk back to civilization from these ruins that we were at for class. So I was really concerned that I wasn't going to be able to get back to our hotel in Rome, because once we got on the train back to the city of Rome, it was another good 30 to 40 minute walk back to our hotel. So that was my biggest concern. It ended up not being an issue, but in that moment, turning to my friends and saying, we have to leave now, And I'm really glad I did that because it could have turned into something potentially worse. And that was about the halfway point for the 3-month trip, and I didn't want to stop enjoying my time. The second time, I wish I would have more stood up for myself to myself. We were in Berlin, so it was the last city of our trip, probably the first week. We were there for 3 weeks, and I literally fell up the stairs in the hotel twice and bruised my knees so bad, and I didn't take my medication because I'm like, it's not a problem, it'll be okay. And literally for 2 months after that, my knee was still bruised. So I should have taken my medication, but I kind of just blew it off. So I just wish that, looking back, I would have advocated to myself for myself so that I could have enjoyed my time more, because having a bruised knee for the remainder of your trip, including flying back to the States, it was just an uncomfortable experience. So I just wish that I would have taken my medication earlier on for that.
Then I had one other thing to add. So I didn't really have anything that happened to me personally, but when I did go to the New Zealand trip, we did have a fellow who he packed all of his medicine in his check-in bag, and he didn't put any in his carry-on, and it got lost for a day or two. So that was a really big issue, and he was very worried. He didn't have much medicine to start with in the first place because of the country he came from. Luckily, we were with the New Zealand chapter, and they had plenty of factor they could give him, so he was fine. But just to kind of reiterate Alex's point, 2 bags, put medicine in, 1 for carry-on, 1 for check-in. And also to conserve space, if you remove the medicine from the boxes and just have, the vials and things like that, that can really help conserve space. So you can fit a lot more medicine in your bags if you do that.
Great recommendations by you all. So really the last question really, and I know that many of you have already discussed it, but not feeling inhibited by your bleeding disorder during your travels, by preparing, by advocating for yourself, both in advance and while on the road, you are still able to have a really enjoyable time. So kind of what final recommendations or suggestions would you give to community members that might be interested in traveling but might be a little bit cautious about it, or maybe their parents are a little bit cautious about it for them? What kind of final advice would you give?
For me, can you hear me? Yes? Okay. I saw Sean. 2 things I just want to mention again. 1, prepare for a worst case scenario and bring more factor and supplies than you think you'll need. I mentioned earlier, talk to your treatment center, talk about that, because when I was on my 3-month trip, I brought so much extra factor. I had a gigantic bag full of factor and supplies that didn't even have clothes in it. It was just for that. And I still ran out because I'd had such a bad bleed. Fortunately, I had a friend, actually it wasn't a friend, it was a teacher that was coming to the study abroad program, and he brought it with him with a great deal of help from my treatment center to prepare all of that. So it's not fun running out of factor. And 2, again, just like Sean reiterated, separate everything in 2 bags in case your things are lost or stolen. And that's really all I have to add.
I think for me, the last kind of piece of advice I would give would just be smart with the people you're traveling with. If you're going to go traveling and do a cool fun trip in Europe or somewhere else, or spring break in Mexico or whatever it is, just be smart with the people you're traveling with. If you're gonna, if you might get injured and then the people you're traveling with aren't very considerate or things like that, and they wouldn't be willing to walk back with, like Michelle mentioned, and Alex had friends, same thing. You might not want to travel with those folks. It's always good to have at least one person who is, a good person, can stay with you and will advocate with you, and if need be, wait with you if you get injured, or be able to, help you out anyway. So I would say just be smart and prep as much as you can, and just choose to travel with good people.
So I think for me, the two biggest pieces of advice are to be knowledgeable. No one understands your body and what you need more than yourself. So don't let limitations come in your way to do an amazing experience. My study abroad and my trip to Australia were two of the greatest experiences I've ever had in my entire life. And I wouldn't want anything to happen because of that. And so for me, a lot of the prep came in beforehand, knowing what my menstrual cycle looked like as a woman and preparing for that. Looking at how much product I go through the month before I left so that I could pack enough plus extra. That was really important because I knew my body. So knowing your body, knowing your medication that you use, and how to add. And then my last piece of advice is just that advocacy piece that we've already touched on, but it's so important. You don't want to be miserable throughout this wonderful experience because you were not able to bring enough medication, or you didn't speak up and a bleed got out of control because you wanted to hang out with your friends instead of going back to the hotel to take your factor or to wrap up that ankle. So don't be afraid to speak up for yourself, and don't be afraid to have fun and take some risks because you will have the most amazing time. I guarantee it.
Awesome. So just for some final tools, I just wanted to share with you all listening. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen here for a moment. Let's see. So at HFA, we have a toolkit called Be Prepared. And we just have a few resources on here specific to international or travel in general. There is some travel tips, downloadable resource on here, a sample travel letter, medical supplies luggage tag, and some useful translations for international travel as well. So check that out on our website if you're interested. And let me go back to everyone else. All right, great. So thanks again, guys, for our panelists for being on the line tonight. Sean, Michelle, Alex, really appreciate all of your advice and personal perspectives. And make sure to keep in tune with our HFA Young Adult Hangouts. We have another one coming up in August, on August 4th, and that focus will be on young adults living with inhibitors and hearing their own personal experiences. So with that, I bid you all adieu. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.